Good afternoon. And for those of us joining us from the Netherlands, good morning. Welcome to Catalyst. We have a very special event today to introduce a new ecosystem partner, the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. We're also live on Facebook, so to those of you who are joining us on Facebook, thank you for dialing in. My name is Derek. I'm the CEO of Padang & Co. Catalyst is a collaboration between Padang & Co. and clinician innovator-led Alpha Labs. And for those of you who are not yet familiar with Catalyst, it's first of a kind innovation hub for medtech and health tech ecosystem here in Singapore, and the space is adjacent to eHealth in Outram Park. So we aim to bring together clinician innovators, startups, large corporations, and other ecosystem partners to create new partnerships to deliver better health outcomes and more meaningful business impact. Now, during this particular session this afternoon, please feel free to drop your questions at any time in the Q&A panel. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I will moderate a discussion panel later. You'll be able to pose those questions to the panelists. Please note that this session will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel in a few days' time, and we'll follow up with you with the email with some key takeaways with the recording as well. You can view this again. So now let me just pass the virtual mic to Barbara and Gabby from the Embassy.
Thank you, Derek. I would like to introduce our Deputy Ambassador, Mr. Hayo Provo-Kluit. Next to being the Deputy Ambassador, he's also the head of our economic department. So Hayo, over to you for some opening remarks.
Sorry, after a year of working online, it still happens. I'm sorry about that. It's a pleasure to be part of today's event. And I think if we look at the Netherlands and Singapore, we both face similar challenges with similar demographic changes in life expectancy and low birth rates. And this implies that we have to ensure that healthcare costs will remain affordable. And one way of doing that is through more digitization. Another way of keeping healthcare affordable is, of course, through prevention and healthy living and healthy aging. And examples of this are, for instance, in Singapore, the eHealth, and in Amsterdam, the Gezonde Stad 2050, the Healthy City 2050. And over the past years, the Netherlands and Singapore have learned a lot from each other. And we look forward to continuing to do so in the field of healthcare. There have been missions back and forth from Singapore to the Netherlands and from the Netherlands to Singapore. And actually, we had also foreseen that our Minister for Health would have come to Singapore in March 2020. For obvious reasons, of course, that plan had to be postponed, but it does show the commitment of our health sector to really engage with Singapore. In healthcare and in health tech, what is important, of course, is that you have a network, that you have partners with which you introduce your new products, your innovations, the products of your R&D, and you need to work together with startup companies, with hospitals, patients, insurance companies. And what is important, of course, is that people and organizations help you to get there. And that's something that exactly Catalyst and, of course, also the Netherlands Embassy do. And today's event is one of the examples of what we try to achieve by linking people together and allowing them to work together to really present new innovative products and solutions for healthcare and healthy aging. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. I would happily hand back to you, Barbara, because you are a real expert on the life science healthcare, and of course, Hubby on the startup scene. So thank you so much. I wish you a wonderful event today, and I hope that this is the start of some wonderful collaboration. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Hayo. I cannot agree more. I think that's why we're also very happy to partner with Catalyst. I think especially in this field of medtech and medical R&D, that it's very important to have a network, know where to go, know what the regulations are and things like that. Asra, could you maybe show my slides? Thank you, that's great. So I will keep this short, but I just want to focus a little bit on give you an insight on the health innovation ecosystem in the Netherlands. I'm here today with my colleague Gabi van Herft, who's the startup liaison. My name is Barbara Wiewel, and I'm an advisor for technology, innovation and science. And we're both part of the economic network of the MNC of the Netherlands. Yeah, thanks. I think my computer is also lagging a little bit. Yeah, here's some basic facts about the Netherlands. In terms of R&D, it's important that Singapore and the Netherlands are quite similar. So they're both small countries. We really see the importance, therefore, of international collaboration, not only to improve our position as a knowledge economy, but also as this results really in better R&D and innovation. We have a rapidly aging population, and we need to keep healthcare affordable. So really digitalisation is very important in that. Even though we have a very high adoption of IT in healthcare already, and almost all doctors use electronic patient records, for example, there's a lot to gain still. It was estimated that we could save about 18 billion euros in healthcare costs by 2030 by, for example, using digitalization to improve efficiency in hospital operations, but also advanced analytics and digitalization of services such as e-consult or having patients self-diagnose at home. Could you go to the next slide? This is very brief, our innovation policy. It's called the top sector and mission-oriented top sector and innovation policy. And very important is the collaboration between the private sector and government and research, also called the Dutch triple helix approach. In health, our mission is by 2040 to increase the lifespan of citizens in good health, and also to decrease differences between socioeconomic groups, because it really matters, even though Netherlands is a very small country, it still matters where you are born in terms of how healthy you age, for example. Could you go to the next slide? This is a brief overview of the research community in the Netherlands. So we have 8 academic hospitals, and we have 4 technical universities, almost all also with a medical angle. So the Wageningen University Research is more focused on healthy food, for example, and the University of Twente is very strong in AI and high tech. There's not so many medtech companies active in Singapore yet. We have SIUX and Demcon that provide service engineering, so they are high-tech engineering companies. And Philips, of course, that focus more on software, but also larger medical devices. Could you go to the next slide? Yeah, what's interesting is that we spend about 10% of GDP on healthcare. In Singapore, that's about 5%. So I'm actually also curious to see where those differences come from. And quite a lot of investment in R&D is done by companies. And that's stimulated, for example, in the Leiden Bioscience Park, the Brainport, Eindhoven cluster, where private sector and universities and research institutes work together. So that's comparable to Biopolis in Singapore. If you look at the investments by government recently, that's focused on digital health, medtech, but also on more biotech, for example, regenerative medicine and organ on a chip initiatives. We don't have a instrument for bilateral innovation, which is very high on our wish list. But what I do want to highlight is that there is an AI cluster school open until end of June, which provides funding for bilateral projects AI related. So that would be AI and health in this case. Good to go to the next slide. This is an overview of the most key, for this audience to know, most key departments at the embassy. We represent today the Netherlands Innovation Network and the Startup Department. So what we do, for example, is organize incoming missions. We have one planned for the fall of this year, but also we can help with providing information on developments in Singapore, providing information on ongoing funding opportunities and things like that. So really do reach out to us if you have any questions. Maybe we can answer it or someone in our network can. On the last slide, so the next slide is our contact information. I think we also will send these slides with the follow-up email so that you have it for your own reference. And then I'm hoping I'm a little bit within the time that was allocated for me, and I would like to pass back to you, Derek, for the panel discussion.
Thank you, there. Before I introduce the panel, I'd like to remind everyone, if you have got a question, can you please key in your question in the Q&A function? You see the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We have 3 panelists today. First, I'd like to introduce Professor Andrea Meyer, Professor of General Medicine Aged Care, University of Melbourne, I think Andrea is currently actually also moving to Singapore and could actually already working in NUS. We'll hear from her shortly. We also have Professor Karl Munsch, Director and Health Innovation NL, and Dr. Michael Ho, Head of Innovation at the National Health Innovation Center in Singapore. Welcome, panelists. Can we just start with a quick introduction by your respective selves? Andrea, maybe starting with you.
Of course, yes. Andrea Meyer. I'm now in the Netherlands and working at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. By training, I'm a medical doctor, specialist in internal medicine and geriatrics. And my research life is really focusing on preventing age-related diseases to induce a healthier lifespan. So that's very important, and I do that, as you already said, at the University of Melbourne, and since recently also at the NUS. So I'm looking forward to join physically NUS in May. And I also had a couple of management functions, for example, in Amsterdam, but also in Melbourne, to really guide the healthcare system towards ways how we can make healthcare provision a little bit more efficiently and with a higher quality. So that's also my aim. Thank you.
Thank you. Karl, over to you, and we'll play the video shortly, immediately after your introduction.
Thank you, Derek. Good morning, good afternoon, and maybe good evening. My name is Karl Munsch. I'm a clinical epidemiologist working in the Netherlands at the UMC Utrecht. Actually, my whole career always focused on how to bring new innovations in healthcare, and particularly the non-drug innovation, because that's the challenging part. Drug innovations and medical drugs are actually easy for epidemiologists. You simply randomize a double blind, and that's it, and there's no fun there. But for the non-drug innovation, there is the challenge. Legislation is different. The whole legal aspects are very different. So there are the challenges. And I always evaluated new methods to bring those innovations to the market. And that means that for some innovations like implants, you need to do more than for an eHealth. And that is a challenge, and therefore I actually launched as a director of Health Innovation Netherlands, which will be introduced in a few minutes, in the Netherlands, which is not only open for companies in the Netherlands, but actually for the whole world, with only one motive, is to bring those innovations that matter to the healthcare system and get it reimbursed somehow. And the innovations that don't matter, let's immediately get them out of the system where they are not needed anymore. Thank you.
Yes, and as mentioned earlier, we have a little video to show you with the Health Innovation Netherlands. Carl thought that it would be the best and quickest introduction to what they do, which actually will help you better understand some of the discussions later. Let's play this video.
During our lifetime, we rely on a range of medical technologies for our health, from heart stents and hip replacements to blood tests, MRI scans, wearables, and medical apps. Medical technology is moving at a rapid pace. However, not all valuable innovations reach the market, and many devices on the market lack clear-cut evidence of their effectiveness. Our society needs to find ways to make sure that health innovations are both safe and affordable, with benefits for their users. Innovators are motivated to create novel devices for patients, but navigating a path from idea or prototype to a safe, effective and successful medical device is often difficult. Health Innovation Netherlands is a unique infrastructure in which all stakeholders active in the field of medical devices and health innovation are present. From patients to care providers, and from health insurance companies to regulators. Our ambition is to stimulate the development of medical devices that are safe and cost-effective, and which have a proven benefit for the well-being of end users. We guide innovators by organising roundtables. A Health Innovation Netherlands roundtable brings all stakeholders together at an early stage of development. The innovator receives detailed feedback as well as guidance on how to proceed. Such critical, in-depth evaluations help to ensure the uptake of effective, affordable and beneficial medical devices. Experiences from the roundtables, together with methodological research, will be used to establish new standards for the evaluation of health innovations. Health Innovation Netherlands, bringing health innovation to the next level.
I will revisit some of what's being shared later. Over to you, Michael, for a quick introduction.
Hey, hello everyone. I'm Michael from National Health Innovation Singapore. So basically, I'm a scientist by training, so specializing a lot in the medical device development. I have been in this health tech innovations field for close to 13 years. I think this has been a very interesting journey throughout. I think anyone from the health tech innovation, they will know. I mean, it's always exciting to see how you bring this health tech innovation to reach the patient side and see the good outcome of it. It's always so exciting to do it. So in a way that, I mean, from the research scientist, I realized that it's quite tough to translate a research to innovation that can reach the patient bedside. That's why I joined NHIC to really help to accelerate this moving from the research to somewhere there's something that's more commercializable. And this is what we at Singapore National Health Innovation Center, in short I call it NHIC, we do. So basically we provide the public research sector in Singapore, specifically the healthcare sector, with some sort of grants to help them translate their innovations to something that's commercializable. There's always a gap between research and the actual application. So we try to bridge across this by providing some grants. And in addition to the grant support, we also help to bring in the right resources, like consultants and all the different project managers, to help them to bring this innovation forward. I think in short, this is something that we do. We have been around for just around 7 years, and through this period we have facilitated like 46 commercial licenses and catalyzed the formation of around 15 spin-off company, and those companies have raised around investment of around 22 million. Around that is the number that we have in this short span of 7 years. Yeah, over back to you, Derek.
Thank you, Michael. So perhaps maybe to structure our conversation, let's start from the top, right? The very top, in terms of like the ecosystem or the big issues. Michael, you talk about the how tough it is to translate research to commercialize solution. How you talked about in your video introduction, there was a talk about how hard that journey actually is. Now, I mean, as a layperson, we're just sort of looking in, what makes innovation in this sector just more difficult than others? Like, how do you think we can actually help aspiring entrepreneurs and startups actually navigate this? Carlo, Michael, you like to start?
Sure. I mean, for the whole thing about this medical device or pharmaceutical development, I think the development timeline and the resources that needed is pretty large, and this is quite challenging for a small company without much resources, especially for medical device and health tech itself. Most of them are non-revenue generation for a period of it could be up to 5 to 6 years, and without sufficiently de-risk the technology, it may be too high a risk for the investor to come in early. I guess this is one of the challenge. And interestingly is that the more innovative the solution, the larger the barrier of entry will be in terms of regulatory and reimbursement angle. So innovative is good, but too innovative may be quite challenging, a pathway for them to take.
Thanks. Carl?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So what you see is that if you indeed the comparison with medical drugs was already made, is there almost by law in all the countries, people need to do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies, and even a pharmacoeconomic evaluation, which means that at the moment that the decision is made for a medical drug to enter the system, there's quite some knowledge, which is helpful for the companies and helpful for the healthcare system and the patient, because they know more or less whether it's safe, whether it's effectiveness, and even whether it's cost effectiveness compared to care that we deliver now. And for for non-drug innovations, it's a totally different system. Particularly in Europe, it's the CE system. You need to allow to go for a CE, and that means that you particularly, it will change this year, by the way, particularly need to show safety and technical performance. And then they have CE, and then a company thinks we are there very often. And but CE is the easiest part actually to get an innovation into the healthcare system, because then the question is, okay, which healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, whatever the innovation is intended to do, is waiting for this, wants to use it. Who is going to pay for this? Who wants to reimburse this? Which juridical aspects need to be suited? So what happens is that a company thinks, we have CE, why don't you use it? The healthcare system says, yeah, but I still want to know whether it's effective or cost effective, or at least better or as good as what I do now. And they don't have that evidence because they don't need it. So there's no malpractice. It's simply that they don't need to do it for CE. So we are almost in a vacuum. The company think, why don't you use it? The healthcare providers and the patients say, show me that it's better. And we are in a past situation, and that's the whole, where particularly non-medical drug innovations suffer. And that's the whole reason why HiNL is actually launched to bridge those gaps, to make sure that the companies are helped to get their innovations to the system, and that the healthcare system can rely on those innovations that truly matter. And that's, I think, what is the huge difference between medical drugs and non-medical drug innovations. And we have to deal with this together.
Yeah. Thanks, Carl. And I'll come back to you shortly and pick up the fact of collaborations and how people should and best practices in collaboration in this particular space. Andrea?
Derek, may I add something? And it's of course who is developing the product, etc. But you also need a consumer, and I think that's also an issue in healthcare, because I really think as a healthcare professional that we have a very paternalistic or maternalistic system. Like my patients are not asking for the apps yet. And as you know, we are handling, or I'm handling my money via apps, and I'm handling my flights via the apps, and I do, I buy grocery via apps, etc. but none of my patients is actually asking, can I manage my health via a certain product? So I think also the consumer engagement, because there's such a trust in the healthcare system, is not yet there, in asking for a revolution, what we saw actually in other businesses in the last 15 or 20 years ago. So I think that's also a very important change, that there is a need to change as a healthcare system, because now it's quite passive.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, your research is in aging, and do you think there's anything particular about this area that that presents additional challenges to startups?
I wouldn't say so. I think it's a growing market, and it's dependent on how you define aging. I define aging from conception to death, actually, because then time is rolling over you, and then it induces damage. But I would say we have to just learn how we can tackle different groups of individuals, either with a higher age who have sensory impairments, for example, who cannot hear very well or see very well. But also, I think we have to tackle, which I think is even more important, people with a lower education, lower socioeconomic class, that they actually can also be able to use technology or innovations and know about the innovation. Knowing is first, and then doing it, that's the second step. So that's very important. And I think it's for businesses, for startups. It's a growing market, not only the aging or the aged care sector, but especially how to make sure that the entire population is able to be involved and can prevent diseases and invest in health personally and as a society.
So you seem to be talking about behavioral changes in consumers, right? They need, every one of us need to have some sort of behavioral changes in order to live better, live more healthily, age more actively. Whereas there are some innovations where we're talking about changing the behaviors of clinicians because they are using the devices. Just to pick up an earlier point that Carl brought up about collaborations. Carl, would you like to just share a little bit more how you enable those collaborations between the different types of stakeholders?
Yes, I can do that, Derek. Because what you see, what as an innovator need to do is quite some paths, a long path you need to follow. And you constantly encounter different stakeholders, and that it starts with an idea, then there is a prototype, then you need to get somehow to a CE. To do that, you need to do a CE approval or FDA approval. And then you need to do some evaluation, so you need to do some studies. And when you're there, you apparently need to convince the patients or the consumers. I mean, you have healthcare innovations that range from implants that go into a body for 30 years, but it also has robotics, it has biomarkers, it has imaging tests, and it has, of course, where usually, by the way, in this group are the healthcare providers. That is the target population. But of course, you also have increasingly, particularly if we talk about healthy aging, is with medical apps and with AI algorithms, where actually the consumer, you and I, we all are the potential target population. So that's a different concept. So an innovator constantly gets into contact with new stakeholders, including regular organizations, health insurance companies, so many stakeholders, and they have to do it consecutively. And they only look ahead, or they can only look ahead just to the next hurdle, so to say. And there are many hurdles. You saw that on the movie. And that's why we thought with Health Innovation Netherlands, okay, what are all stakeholders involved? Somewhere in the process from ID to end product. And end product, I mean implementation in the healthcare system, including the reimbursement, whether that is by an healthcare insurance company or by ourselves, if it's on the shelf. Now, all these stakeholders are quite a few, which is patients, healthcare providers, researchers, health economists, it is insurance companies, it is the regulatory agencies, like in the Netherlands, that is SIN and NICE and FDA. We have all these stakeholders around one table, where usually the innovator sees all these stakeholders consecutively and tries to convince them to get to the next step. What we did is, no, that process which takes about 3 to 4 years, let's do that in one day and bring all these stakeholders together. And it sounds almost too good to be true, but we are running it already for quite a while and quite successful. So we really physically bring online now, bring them in one room and help the healthcare providers with all the questions, not for the next step, but actually for the coming 5 years. So we actually give them answers to the questions they haven't asked themselves yet, but they will ask themselves or they will face in the coming 5 years. And that's doable. And we found out that it was not doable if I organized this, because who is this Carl Moons who thinks to know how innovation should be evaluated? It was only doable because these are parties or organizations by law have to make decisions on whether to reimburse or put in the system or not. And they are not going to sit around the table with an innovator or with patients or healthcare providers. They only do that if the Ministry of Health mandates this. So the Ministry of Health and Economic Affairs mandated this and actually launched this a while ago. And therefore, that's the only reason why all these stakeholders are really around one table to focus on that innovation, to give tailored guidance for that innovation. And that's different for an app than for an implant, of course. Should be different.
Right. Thank you. And look, you know, we sit in Singapore and we're constantly in awe on how the Dutch actually managed to get everybody on board, right? And it's not just healthcare, but we you know, at Partner & Co, we do a lot of work in food and agri-tech and looking at what the Food Valley has achieved, and you know, in terms of collaboration, and able to get you know, the Netherlands up to this point where you're the world's largest exporter of agricultural products. It's just, that's amazing. Michael, you know, hearing what Carl's just described, how does that compare to the Singapore experience?
I think we agree with Carl. I mean, it's like, I mean, for the health tech, there's so many stakeholders to be involved, and all this consideration has to be really put in place from the very start of the innovation process. Whether it's idea or not, it's never too late to bring all these things come in early, because this will affect the design, will affect every single thing down the road. And as just now Prof. Carl has shared, I think the process of the safety regulatory process is so long, so many stages. The later you find out the challenges that need to do a reiteration, is actually more costly. So it's always good to bring everything back to the front and identify the challenges at the start. So this has been something that we have been working on. At NHIC itself, when we provide the grants process, we also put in an evaluation panel that's constituted of multiple dimensions, where there's coming from the clinical angle, looking into the clinical workflow, hospital operation, and whether it's cost effective to be implemented into the hospital. We also bring in the investors into the evaluation board so that they can look into the commercial aspect of it, and the technical expertise also bring it in. So we actually constitute a panel that is which is constituted of regulator, manufacturers, investors, clinicians, for all the dimensions to really come in to give the different inputs to the team. And that's where we also put in our project manager to help the development process, because we also realized that, I mean, as a small innovation coming out from the institution, they may not have a whole dynamic things that can look into all different angles. So that's where we also come in to bring a project manager to support the development, and also rope in the consultants from the different aspects, whether it's regulatory, business, to really pulling everybody together and help them to link to a bigger network along the whole development process, so that the help are needed to move it in that area. Yeah.
Thank you. Just continuing the whole discussion on Netherlands and Singapore, the similarities and differences. Andrea, your research on aging is focused on Singapore, the Netherlands, and Australia. Very, very different places, very different markets. But what do you think are the sort of biggest differences in approach in enabling healthy and active aging in Singapore and Netherlands?
Look, there's lots of similarities because the population is aging, and that's worldwide. And if you're 60% have age-related diseases, 2 or more chronic diseases. So the problem, or I think the success we have healthcare is the same in all the countries because we are growing old with lots of diseases. If I am looking around in the Netherlands and really feel the healthcare system, what the Netherlands is really has done very, very, very well compared, for example, to Singapore and Australia, is that so strong primary healthcare network. Like, we have to be so proud of our GPs. We have to be so proud of our nursing homes, even if there's always something to say about nursing homes and how we care for older adults. But what the Netherlands, the Dutch system really has is a very strong primary healthcare system. And I think that's the basis for a very healthy healthcare system, because you can buffer lots of diseases in the primary healthcare system and enable actually then the secondary and the tertiary care to act if it's needed, but not overload that system. So I think if colleagues would like to come to the Netherlands, we can arrange some visits in hospitals, no problem, to really see and feel how it's interconnected. What's not yet interconnected, for example, is the electronic medical record between primary and secondary care. There are lots of investments and trials actually doing that, because this is really what I think, in my opinion, if you would ask my opinion, that's really what should happen. But the strong primary healthcare system. What I find so fabulous in Singapore is especially the tertiary, but also the secondary healthcare system. That's fabulous. That's top notch in the world. And what I really admire nearly in Singapore, that if Singapore has an idea and sees a problem, there is a workaround to really find solutions and to invest in that. So, for example, I've never seen a country, at least at this moment in time, where healthy aging is such a topic on all levels, societal levels, where there is a real investment in a plan to solve. And I wouldn't say it's a problem because we created it because of the healthcare system itself, but Singapore really invests in that and really tries now in health districts, for example, to engage with the different stakeholders from the Ministry of Health to the local population to see how you can enable society to grow older gracefully and without the age-related diseases. In the end, to have, of course, that's the main goal, to have lots of manpower back in 10 or 15 years, and not having the tsunami of older individuals with lots of diseases. So I think it's a fantastic environment to trial out new products, systems, to enable the population to have a higher health span, so the time experiencing in health and not needing the GP, or the GP just helping.
Thank you. And since we're on the line, might also pose you a question from the audience for your insights and advances, new innovations in geriatric care with a focus on dementia care. I think dementia as a topic is really quite it's coming into mainstream, because like recently I've seen a couple of movies, Supernova and Anthony Hopkins' new movie, The Father, talking about dementia, and very confronting in that way. I think it's going to drive a lot of conversations around that. What are you observing in terms of new innovations around that area?
Lots of innovations. Look, we all would like to have the pill to treat dementia, which is not possible yet. And in the last 10 to 20 years, there was not the revolution or this one pill as we have now, the COVID vaccination, not yet for dementia. So we really have to, and lots of countries doing that, to really prevent age-related diseases like dementia. So healthy lifestyle, we know that if you move more and if you eat, have a better a diet, then actually your risk of having dementia is much lower, because you also do not have the cardiovascular diseases. So prevention is very important at the forefront of lots of countries seeing that. that's not helping the ones who are living at the moment with dementia. It's estimated that 25% of the 75-year-olds have cognitive impairment, and very often it's not diagnosed. So what Singapore, for example, doing is really trying to diagnose diagnose dementia, to then also find solutions, for example, in the environment, how to actually live with dementia in a society. And there's lots of investigations at the moment, what the right living structure should be, and how you can actually live in a very ethical way in a society with cognitive impairment. And Singapore is also there at the forefront of measuring it, and then also helping while waiting for that medication, that drug treating dementia.
Thank you. Yeah, this topic itself, I think probably warrants a whole new whole other event. So Carl, since we're on the topic of this aging as well, I think that we've got a couple of questions on market access. I'll read a couple of questions to you. From the reimbursement perspectives for healthy aging and prevention products and services both in Netherlands and Singapore, how difficult is the market access? And the second question is, how much is the Netherlands medical system willing to adapt innovation, especially value-based care tools in aging space? How to approach the right contact for further exploration of our devices?
Okay, let me first get to the first question is, and that's a tricky one. Actually, that's almost, and they are related to each other, by the way. Preventive innovations for preventive care or in the public health setting is hard. People are still pointing at each other. Who is going to pay for this? Is it actually the consumer that's going to pay for them themselves? Is it somewhere to be reimbursed? But who then and how then? And that's because the Dutch system is that healthcare providers are paid by performance, what they do, and not what they achieve. And that comes to the second question in a minute. And prevention is, yeah, it's not so much done there. It's people need to be to become aware of their health and of their life and their surrounding, and act upon that, sometimes with involvement of healthcare providers. And that's hard then. Who is going to reimburse that? So that's the bad news. The good news is that with HINL, we're getting actually these innovations increasingly, of course, because aging and prevention and public health innovations are getting more popular, including in psychiatric domain. And we are now having the first tables, we call it round tables, with all healthcare, all stakeholders involved. Okay, colleagues, these are the innovations that are going to change the world in the next decade at least. So how are we going to change our reimbursement system? How are we going to make sure that that it's not done for free? Somebody needs to be paid back, of course. Not payback, but get the revenues, including the innovators. So we need to change that system, and that's now actually right. It will be next week on the table of our first discussions on this. So per innovation, we always check how the reimbursement can help, but we also take it to a higher level to change the whole system on that reimbursement of preventive innovations. And that brings me back to the second question. If we're going to change the system that it's value-based reimbursement, namely for what we achieve with the innovations and with the interventions we do, based on the values and the effectiveness that we achieve by our actions, that changes the system, of course. And if we're going to change the reimbursement from performance, paid by performance, but paid by value, then we have solved the first question immediately. However, at least in the Netherlands, we're not there yet, but the whole idea behind HINL is to make sure, because patients, consumers, and healthcare providers, we know, and I also know from my own experience working for 30 years in the university hospital, they're only going to use it and rely on it and trust it if somehow we have shown value, read effectiveness or cheap or whatever. So that whole value-based evaluation, that idea is the premise, is the whole incentive of high NL, and that's the reason why we actually invented high NL. And Michael, just sorry, Derek, just to add on what Andreas says, is we presented the high NL also across the ocean. We were in Washington, and where also the FDA was present, and we said we got actually all university hospitals and non-university hospitals are involved in high NL, and we link the innovators to our backyard so they can immediately proceed for the evaluations and implementation. And the whole Netherlands is involved. That's what Andrea just said. And they start to laugh when I said it in the US, because how can you do that? Now, we only have 8 university hospitals and 85 non-university hospitals. And then they start laughing even more because New York City already has more, apparently, I didn't know. So, but that's the unique infrastructure, I think, of the Netherlands, is that it was easy for us to align everyone in the high NL infrastructure. And because of the size of the country, of course, but also particularly because we are so close to each other and already collaborate with a lot in the healthcare innovation system, that it was easy for us to launch high NL.
Just to remind everyone of the acronym High NL, HINL stands for Health Innovation Netherlands. I've just discovered that both countries like acronyms. That's something in common. So this next question actually goes to both yourself, Carl, and Michael. How are the Netherlands and Singapore receptive to technology products that require considerable time to commercialize given all the approval process? In both countries, how are health tech startups likely to incorporate a B2B revenue model with hospitals or health boards? Michael?
Over here, I think in Singapore, I think we are very supportive for having the health innovative product to come into the place. But I guess like what Carl just has mentioned, I think in terms of hospital procurement system, I think the cost effectiveness and showing that they are able to be the best, I mean, they're able to bring value to the healthcare system is something very important. As I guess, although we are still not there moving towards the value-based reimbursement, but nowadays there has been more and more scrutiny on in all the different countries. There are more scrutiny on the cost effectiveness, whether you bring a new technology, does it really lower the cost down, or certain technology does really bring up the costing. So there's a different consideration coming in there. Yeah.
Thank you. Carl?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's hard for startups to get there where they want to be, and it depends if it's an innovation from that startup that wants to be in the formal reimbursement system, then they need to go to the agency, which is more or less the Dutch FDA, who makes that decision, and then definitely you have to prove value for that. If, however, it is an innovation that is outside the reimbursement system, but there is a kind of free budget by hospitals that they can actually pay that innovation or perform that innovation, then the hospitals are in charge. And sometimes the health insurance companies are there, the decision makers. So that again is a reason why we try to do with high NL, is since they are sitting at the same table, they can't point at each other at that moment. And that sounds like a joke, but it's not so. There will be a consensus recommendations to help them to make a decision. Okay, colleagues, who is going to pay for this and who is going to reimburse this? So it's high NL tries to help those startups. We don't succeed always, of course, but to a large extent, I see that we can link them to the right stakeholders, which they didn't know yet.
Thank you. Just a very quick question before we go on to our last closer, because we've got about 10 minutes left. A very quick one from Andrea and Carl. It relates to a question about privacy. And the question is like, blockchain can be helpful in this I was just wondering what's the extent of this being used in the Netherlands, or is there any other solution that the Netherlands has adopted to address this issue of privacy?
Carl, do you want to answer?
Actually, I pointed my hand to you. I can give a short answer, of course, but I thought you might go first.
Actually, I don't know what the regulatory systems actually say. I just know that it's really necessary to have the exchange of data to enable everybody to work efficiently. So I cannot answer the question. I'm sorry.
I think I can elaborate a little bit on that. And if we talk about privacy, are we talking about privacy about information from the innovator to stakeholders, non-disclosure agreements, or the privacy of data from citizens and patients used for evaluation for innovations?
Not specified in that case.
Okay, now then answer both. The first one is the privacy. So if an innovator comes to the HNL table, all stakeholders, and that was only possible if the Ministry of Health dictates that have an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. So that's ticked off. So that privacy aspect. The other privacy aspect is the use of data, patient data for evaluations. Now, actually, it's an easy answer is if you do prospective evaluations, because you need to do it in a pre-designed study and not with real-world data, by definition, that privacy aspect will be taken care of, as you always have to do if you do research on individuals. So that's an easy one. If, however, you do evaluation with real-world data, and particularly the AI field uses that, artificial intelligence field, then it's a different story. And in the Netherlands, we have increasingly used using the opt-out method, so that data that are stored in hospitals or in healthcare registers can also be used unless patients opt out for research practices. And so yes, it is in place, and we are increasing the possibility of doing research with real-world data, allowing or ensuring that the privacy issues and the informed consents are well considered.
Right, thank you, Linus. And we've got a last few minutes, so I'd like to ask you a question that is in a lot of people's minds, and this also responds to one of the questions here. COVID, you know, we're seeing things, you know, there's lots of disruption, and we've seen pace of innovation accelerate in certain areas. Now, do you think this is a one-off event, or do you think we now see what Dr. Anand in the question says, a new golden age for innovation worldwide? You know, like your views on that. Michael, let's start with you.
Yeah, I would say that I think this COVID has really shown that, I mean, we do have the resources, and we can, once we come together and collaborate and the trust in each other, I think we can expedite the whole process. But I guess importantly, I think it's about really collaboration. How this thing has happened to speed up so fast, I guess there's a lot of involvement from the different regulatory body in the world, and they come together, they trust each other, the data, everything. I think the trust and collaboration and the background science has been, actually it's through years of research and the science has been developed there, but there's also moving forward is really through the support of a multiple government agency, the regulator, everything coming together is collaboration and trust. I would say that to repeat this in a non-crisis thing, I wouldn't say 100% will be replicable, but definitely you can see that some of the good practices such as the telehealth and digital medicine has been more widely accepted. Certainly adoption has been much higher during this period. I would believe some will stay, some process may be optimized, but to be a full speed ahead like what has happened in the vaccination in the past year may not be in a norm situation. I guess safety and all this concern is still the pathway forward. The data is still required, comes together, I guess.
Thank you. And if I may ask you a very quick follow-up question, what kind of innovations do you see coming to NHIC, and based on what you just said, what would you prioritize in supporting?
I guess over at HIC, we do not really have a specific technology domain that we support. We're really coming out from the clinical gap angle because we really looking at if there's a clinical need involved. We are happy to really come in to support. But in the recent years, I do see the trend of getting more and more data-related, AI-related technology coming in. I guess that will be something the trend will still continue on in that angle.
Okay, thank you. Carl?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I see in the Netherlands, but also actually abroad, is as a researcher, I do actually the whole last 40 months only research on evaluation of new innovations to battle corona, to battle SARS-CoV-2 infections and COVID-19, including rapid testing, blood tests, breathomics, but also track and tracing testing. So that's actually the only thing I'm doing for 14 months. So what I've seen happening is that innovation is getting easier to the market. We even had a separate system, a parallel system in place because we have to battle that. And I think that's good. However, looking back at it, is also things came to the market that perhaps shouldn't have been on the market, and also, or at least has been better evaluated before we let them to the market. I'm not mentioning any names. So what I have proposed is that, yes, we had to do this because we had really a situation we never dealt with this before. So it was good, but now we have them. It's still in retrospect, I think we should evaluate, and that's easy done as a living healthcare system with the data we have. There's enough data. We need to battle privacy issues, by the way, to use that data, but there's enough data to evaluate in retrospect with the data we have gathered, which is a lot, to see whether they truly have brought the effectiveness, the accuracy of the innovations we let to the market easier than we ever did before. So yes, it improved this. It has speed up the system for innovators, but I'm not saying that it was always for the better. And let's do that in retrospect. Let's do that in the coming 5-6 months. That is my suggestion. And maybe Michael, Derek, one more thing is that I'd like to announce is 2 and 3 June, there's an international congress where we bring the US system and the European system together to see how we can bridge the ocean and to bring innovations to both markets simultaneously. That's the GAIN-H Symposium, GAINH Symposium on June 2 and 3, where the FDA is present and the European system is present.
Great. What we'll do is we'll get the details from you, and then when we send the today's webinar's participants a follow-up email with links so they can actually register for that too. Thank you for sharing. Andrea?
Yeah, a very short answer. I think we showed that we can do it, and we can do research, and we can evaluate in a very, very short time period. And that's, I think everybody said, oh, you are working so slow. No, we can do it. I think it's very important to prioritize now. So what do we would like to achieve in the next coming year, in the next coming 5 years and 10 years? Because we now tackled COVID, or we tried to tackle it, and we cannot tackle the entire healthcare system. So let's prioritize what we really would like to achieve, and then we can do it. We showed it. It's a showcase.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to some of the questions, but actually I might invite panelists to stay back a little bit longer because we're able to type in quick responses to some of the Q&A. So thank you, everybody. Thank you once again, whether in Singapore or the Netherlands. Thank you for joining. Special thanks to our panelists, Andrea, Carl, and Michael, for your time today. Just a quick reminder, the recording of this webinar will be available on the Catalyst YouTube channel. We'll send you a follow-up email with key takeaways and our contact details if you'd like to keep in touch. So please look out for the email, and we'll also share the link to the conference that Carl just shared with us. And so with that, have a great evening or a great day ahead wherever you are. Thank you once again. We hope to see you once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Derek.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Everybody.
Michael, there's if you just click on the Q&A, you might be able to answer a couple of the questions.
Yep, sure. I'm looking at it.
You're
If there's a
muted.
question that you particularly like to respond to, but otherwise, I think Michael, I think it's specific to Singapore, so we can go to
Okay,
response there.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Really appreciate it.
Bye bye, Gabi. Bye bye, Barbara. Michael, Derek.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.